Hey everybody, here we are talking a little bit about feudalism in Japan. Um, we just kind of finished talking about feudalism in Europe, um, with vassals, lords, and knights, and castles, and kind of all that stuff. And one of the really cool things that's going on, kind of at the same time, is that there's also kind of a feudalism that's set up in Japan as well. And so we have a lot of similarities, but still some key differences in Japan. Now, if you look at some of the things I have on this page, you'll notice that the years. There was really feudalism in Japan from around 1192, so roughly, like 900 years ago, to pretty recent, really the mid 1800s is when the samurai and feudal Japan kind of went away. And if you're kind of interested in this whole samurai thing and what have you, the movie The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise is, I don't want to say like completely historically accurate, but it does kind of cover kind of the last days of the samurai in feudal Japan. Indeed, there was a battle between, the samurais in the old way, and then like the modern Japan in the new way, with guns, machine guns, and cannon, and all that stuff. So, if you are really intrigued with stuff like that, then you'll maybe want to watch The Last Samurai, get some of that kind of good history in there. So let's kind of look at what we're going to focus on today. We're briefly going to just look at social structure of Japan. Also going to look at the samurai code of Bushido. Then also the samurai practice of seppuku. So kind of that is the focus of today. I do have a video posted online on my site that has another. This is a video on samurai and stuff. So if you're really interested, this is something you can kind of check out. So let's go ahead and get started. So as far as the social structure of Japan goes, um, it looks somewhat similar um, to Europe at the time. In Europe, Europe does not have emperor; they have kings who rule smaller kingdoms, and those kings really don't have a lot of power. And in the Japanese social ladder at this time, the emperor is technically on top of the social ladder, but he really doesn't have any power. Okay, he's pretty much a figurehead. He's actually pretty weak. Okay, the real power in Japan is with really the military leaders. In fact, the top dog, the supreme military commander of Japan, was typically called the shogun. And then below the shogun, you have rich landowners called daimyos. Um, these are very similar to the wealthy landowners of Europe. And then below the wealthy landowners, you had the warrior class, the samurai, okay, who are very much, similar to the European knights. And then below the samurai, you have the workers, the peasants, the farmers, the artisans. And then, ironically enough, it's kind of weird, the merchants, the people that do a lot of trading and stuff like that, they were incredibly wealthy, but they were, on the very bottom of the social ladder. Whereas the peasants and farmers, even though they were kind of dirt poor, um, they had very hard lives, but they were looked at as having a very honorable profession, and they were very much respected. Okay. So, anyways, here's the emperor. Here's actually the emperor from World War II, Emperor Hirohito. Like I said, he's kind of on top of the social ladder, but really not a lot of power. Okay. Um, Feudal system in Japan, like I said, it is pretty close to European feudalism. There really is no central government. A central government is one that there's kind of like one big national government that kind of run the show, kind of like in the United States of America. We have a central government located in D.C. And they're obviously very powerful. In Japan, though, it's very weak. Really, the power lies with the wealthy landowners, okay, called the daimyo. And these guys would hire really large armies of samurai, and they would really be the ones that kind of control the Japanese countryside. Okay, very similar to Europe, where the Europeans had very wealthy landowners, lords or whatever, and they would give land to their vassals who were knights, and they would also have kind of like these large private armies. Okay. Now the one key difference we see between Japan and European feudalism is that in Europe, they paid the knights with land. But in Japan, there's really not a lot of land. If you know anything about Japanese geography, it's Oh, the light bulb's going off. If you know anything about Japan's geography, it's very rocky, very mountainous, and so there's really not a land to give away. Okay, in fact, most of the land is mountains and stuff like that, and so it really wouldn't make sense for them to be giving all this land away. So for the most part, samurais were paid with food. Now, if we look at some of these pictures I have here, dear Lord, it's just like all these phones are going off in my house. Sorry about that. So, anywho, here's a picture of Japanese shogun here. Um, anyways, um, Japanese shogun sitting on this rise platform. The shogun, like I said, was the supreme military commander. You can see he's seated on this little platform here on the floor, and just slightly above everyone else. So really, I get a good sense too of the kind of architecture and style there. Moving on, the Japanese have castles just like the Europeans did. So here you can see a really cool example of a Japanese castle. These Japanese lords or landowners, they fought each other just like they did in Europe, and like I said, really cool castles to protect themselves. Um, Here's one of the cool things that I guess I was kind of blown away. Here's a picture of a samurai, an actual samurai. Like I said, the samurais were around up until the mid 1800s. Um, whereas the knights were gone, you know, hundreds of years ago, 500, 600, 700 years ago. These Japanese samurai were around, only 140, 150 years ago. When we had the use of photography. So this guy looks like Darth Helmet from Spaceballs. Is actually a real samurai. You kind of get a feel for how they're dressed. Not as heavily armored. As a Japanese knight. These samurai were hardcore professional warriors. For all they did was learn how to fight. They were master swordsmen. They were master horsemen. They were master, bowmen. I mean, they could be on a horse in full gallop and whip out the bow and arrow and be absolutely deadly with it. And if they got off their horse, they'd take off their sword and they're ready to rock and roll. So these guys were very much incredible warriors. Okay, here's a picture from the last samurai. Here you can see Tom Cruise's character getting ready to spar with a samurai sword. Samurai swords are typically much lighter, but the samurai were very, very good with swords, and they would practice all the time to hone their skills. Um, Here's another picture from the movie The Last Samurai. Here you can see just another vibe for what their armor looked like, their weaponry, kind of how they fought. Yeah, they would fight on horseback preferably, just like the knights of Europe would. But sometimes they have to go on the ground and fight as well. The samurai had a very high status in society. Anyone that showed a samurai disrespect could be killed. So if you look at all the samurai walking down the street, here you can see all the people kind of turn and bow their head, not kind of stare them in the eye. Once again, here's another picture of an actual samurai. Usually they have two swords, one long, one short. So here's the kind of long sword, and here's maybe the smaller dagger used for, I guess, close fighting. I guess you could probably fight with both swords if you wanted to. Another picture of samurai. One of the reasons you always look at these old pictures, everyone looks always so angry, is that you had to stand perfectly still to do some of these old school pictures. Or else they'd be very blurry. So a lot of times you don't see people smiling in these older pictures. It's not because they weren't happy. It's just that that's how you had to do it. So anyways, another vibe for kind of how they were dressed, kind of different weaponry. Everyone had their own kind of unique little armor and stuff like that. Another picture here of the armor. You can probably notice that they don't really have metal armor and stuff. They have more, cloth or leather, which meant that they didn't have as much to carry on them. Probably more mobile. Than a European knight, probably faster. Okay. Another picture of an actual samurai. This guy looks pretty cool. Looks like the Shredder from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles there. Once again, seeing his cool sword and dagger there and his helmet and all of his just looks really cool. Another cool thing about samurai is that typically when they would battle, they would try to find someone of equal skill to themselves. So usually a samurai would kind of walk out to the battlefield and shout out his family's name and all their accomplishments, and hopefully he'd find someone of similar skill, and they would normally go at it. So a lot of these samurai battles were like these massive one-on-ones, and sometimes when they won, they would cut off their opponent's head, kind of to prove their skill. The other thing that the samurai were kind of interesting about the samurai is they were not just like these hardcore brutes. They were very much cultured and very thoughtful people. Um, they were very much committed to war. In fact, many samurais expected to die young. Um, the ideal death for a samurai was, one that was in battle, which is kind of a unique way of looking at things. I don't think a lot of our soldiers or marines, think that the ideal way to go is to die, somewhere in the Middle East. But for a samurai, very much like the Spartans of old, that was kind of like the perfect death, so to speak. All right. Now, like I said before, the samurai were very honorable people. They actually followed a code of honor called Bushido, which is similar to the knights in Europe. They followed something called chivalry. So both warrior classes had this code of honor. Samurai are supposed to be courageous, honorable, and loyal. Samurais are supposed to live a life of focus. To keep their focus, they would do things that required a lot of focus, like write poetry, keep beautiful gardens, and also, it sounds kind of weird, hold elaborate tea parties. Okay? The one thing about samurais that is really interesting to many people is that shame or defeat was really unacceptable. And in Japanese society back then, if one was shamed in battle or defeated in battle in kind of like I said, a shameful way, it was expected for them to regain their honor by committing seppuku, which is ritual suicide, where they would literally take a dagger, as you can see in this picture right here, and they would shove it in their abdomen and basically disembowel themselves, which means to spill out their guts and just sit there and kind of take the pain. So you can see an example of the dagger that could be used. Sometimes, you could do it alone, where you would stab yourself and then, you know, kind of just sit there and try to kind of take it like a man, I guess. But I'm guessing most times what they would do is they would have someone stab themselves. You would stab yourself, and then you would have, one of your close friends or close family. And after a little bit, they would go ahead and behead you with a sword to kind of end your suffering. But this was a way to, um, you know, regain your honor, which is kind of interesting because in Western culture, in America, for instance, suicide is not seen as something that is honorable. It's seen as something that is tragic, even dishonorable. But in Japan, it's very much seen as an accepted way, or was seen as an accepted way, to regain one's honor. And if you look at Japanese history in World War II, you should remember that the Japanese used kamikaze, suicide bombers, essentially, to help their war effort. So in in Japan, suicide is just seen differently in America. Here's another picture of, and you can see obviously it's probably for some kind of movie or something weird like that. But here you can see the guy right here who has obviously shoved the sword into his abdomen, and then there's someone behind him with the sword raised, ready to kind of chop off his head when he's ready. So kind of interesting.